Incredible decision by officer and his loyal dog transformed a family's life in just 24 hours. The cold Midwestern wind sliced through Jake Thompson's uniform as he patrolled the quiet streets of Miller's Grove. He shifted uneasily in his cruiser, the faint whir of fading memories entwining with the howling gusts outside. You can't save everyone. He could almost hear his father, a revered firefighter, remind him in moments of doubt. But how could he remain protective of a community that felt so distant now? Tonight's darkness felt heavier, a weight clinging to his heart. Rex, his steadfast German shepherd, shifted in the passenger seat, looking sideways with a knowing gaze. The shadows played tricks on Jake's mind, each whisper through the trees amplifying his insecurities. No matter how hard he tried to follow in his father's heroic footsteps, he felt hollow. A mere flicker of the man he once idolized, the heroic legacy that loomed larger than life itself. As he drove on, the mundane landscape became interrupted by a flicker of light in the corner of his vision. He slowed his cruiser, a dilapidated car hunched against the curb with its hood up. He approached the vehicle, and dread sank in as he caught sight of Emily. The panic etched on her face, an echo of his own, too familiar. Inside, her two small children huddled together, faces pale and fragile, like dolls abandoned in the cold. Memories resurfaced, his family's struggles after loss. Would he sit idle, bound by duty, or step beyond the lines drawn by circumstance? "Sir, please, I'm just trying to get home." Emily's voice shook him from his thoughts, an urgency cutting through the winter chill. The instinct to help battled with an overwhelming fear, the judgment of the very community he was sworn to guard. Jake envisioned the whispers. He's crossing the line. The tightening knot in his chest brought on a wave of uncertainty. He could still hear his father's voice, guiding him with simple values: compassion, integrity. What would Dad do? The question echoed, grounding him in a parent's wisdom. Torn between the badge and a desperate need to protect, Jake nodded, and with a determined resolve invited Emily and her children to his home for the night. The warmth of his kitchen brought an unexpected lightness to the heavy air. They shared stories around the table, laughter intermingling with their raw truths. Jake learned Emily had once been a vibrant part of the town, a shelter worker, eternally giving. Now she faced a mountain of challenges that pushed her to the shadows. He felt a connection, one born of shared vulnerability. But as they spoke, unease crept in. The fear of potential whispers threatened to dim the glow of their newfound bond. Jake's mind raced with conflict. Protecting them could put him at risk. Just as he began to feel accomplished in defying expectations, his phone vibrated violently against the table. The call from dispatch dragged him from hope, igniting a fear of exposure. "Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue." The urgency in the voice on the other end was deafening, demanding his attention and complicating his decision. How can he uphold the oath of service if it meant sacrificing connections that felt so crucial? The room felt smaller, the weight of constricting expectations closing in as eyes shifted toward him, hopeful, yet apprehensive. Jake needed to choose, and time was slipping through his fingers. Would he defend the fragile family gathered around his table? Or betray his father's legacy by abandoning those in need? The tension hung heavy, heartbeat pounding, leaving him dangling at the precipice of an impossible choice. Jake felt the vibrations of the dispatch call echo in his chest, drowning out the laughter and warmth surrounding the kitchen table. The choice he faced seemed to twist tighter around him, every heartbeat amplifying the conflict within. Emily's anxious eyes bore into him as she sensed his struggle, the moment teetering dangerously on a precipice of trust. The weight of duty and desire clashed violently in his mind. He picked up the phone, the screen illuminating his face in stark contrast to the shadows darkening his thoughts. The dispatcher spoke urgently about a reported disturbance nearby. A domestic dispute, possibly volatile, Every fiber of his being ignited with the instinct to spring into action. He was a cop, a protector. Yet here, in his own home, he was also a refuge. The duality of his role was suffocating. "Jake?" Emily's voice broke through his spiraling thoughts, laced with confusion. "Are you okay?" He glanced up, the flicker of her vulnerability igniting something within him. I have to go," he admitted, his voice betraying a tremor. "There's a situation I need to handle." Her panic changed to fear as she realized what this would mean. "But what about the kids? They're already scared. Can't you just stay a bit longer?" In that moment, Jake was confronted with his own reflection, an officer trying to uphold ideals while grappling with the gut-wrenching reality of human connection. He hesitated, caught in the net of expectation and empathy, recalling how his father would often rush into danger without a second thought, believing wholeheartedly that protecting others was paramount. But Jake had changed. He had learned to weigh actions against consequences. Sacrificing the bond he had just built felt devastatingly wrong, even if the code of his profession urged him to do otherwise. He stood, torn limb from limb by the unsettling chasm between duty and compassion. "I'll be back," he promised, but uncertainty dripped from his words. He hoped it was true, that he could fulfill his obligations and return to the warmth he had come to cherish, but doubt lingered, gnawing at his resolve. As he stepped into the night, Rex instinctively fell into line beside him, as if sensing the turmoil thrumming within Jake's heart. The cold air hit him like a declaration of war against the heat of familial connection he had just forged. Each step toward the cruiser felt like a betrayal. The flashing lights and the cacophony of the dispatch echoed in his mind, drowning out what warmth remained. He unlocked the vehicle, but before slipping into the driver's seat he turned to Rex. "I wish it didn't have to be like this." The dog tilted his head, as if encouraging a decision, reflecting the silent acceptance Jake yearned for. There was not just one path to honor his father's legacy. Driving toward the reported disturbance, every click of the turning signal felt like a countdown, intensifying his internal battle. Would he find himself dealing with the chaos of a domestic dispute? Or worse, would his choices lead to harm for Emily and her children? A sense of impending crisis gripped him, simultaneously igniting determination. He could not let his fears dictate his actions. He needed to confront the reality, not flee from it. At the intersection, he paused as a flicker of headlights darted across his vision. In that moment, everything slowed. He could run towards the chaos and uphold his oath, or he could return to the warmth of the kitchen and embrace a new role. The moment hung heavy, as he had never felt more lost yet defined, fraught with the understanding that these choices would carve out his identity as a protector and a man. Which path would he take? Suddenly, Jake made a decision, one that would redefine his journey, pushing him to confront not just the situation ahead, but the very essence of himself. "Let's go, Rex," he muttered under his breath, the determination palpable in the chill of the night air. What awaited him at the scene was uncertain, but the real fight lay not just outside, but within his soul. Would he come out on the other side not just a protector, but a man who learned to embrace the breadth of his own humanity? As they neared the location, shadows looming in the distance seemed to whisper the answer, and the question lingered. What was he truly prepared to sacrifice? The sirens faded into the distance as he drove through the quiet streets, his mind racing with possibilities. Jake's grip tightened on the steering wheel, every bump in the road feeling like a moment of reckoning. As the uncertainty of what lay ahead weighed heavily on him, he recalled Emily's soft voice, the unspoken plea lingering in his heart. The warmth of her affection felt like a lifeline, wrapping around him as he confronted the cold, harsh reality of his duty. Jake parked near the address provided, the dimly lit house standing like an ominous sentinel against the night sky. The shadows danced across the windows, an unsettling reminder of the storm brewing inside. He glanced at Rex, who looked back with intense eyes, a mirror reflecting Jake's own swirling emotions. They were a team, bound by instinct and the unyielding desire to provide protection. But tonight, the mission felt more personal than ever. It was about saving more than just a physical body. It was about preserving the sanctity of a family. Stepping out of the vehicle, he took a steadying breath, gathering resolve. The door creaked as he approached, and tension coiled within him like a spring waiting to snap. He balanced the weight of what he might encounter: anger, desperation, fear. Would the law he upheld reign supreme over the humanity he felt tugging at his heart? Rex, always attuned to the shifting dynamics, barked softly beside him. As they crossed the threshold of the home, Jake's senses heightened. A sharp argument echoed through the walls, punctuating the air with the bitter taste of rage. Snippets of heated words, accusations, desperate pleas, revealed the chaos spilling beyond the confines of anger. The moment Jake stepped into the living room, he was met with a tableau of anguish. A couple stood, faces flushed with fury, their postures rigid with unresolved conflict. A child, a boy no older than 6, huddled in the corner, wide-eyed, clutching a toy as though seeking comfort in the only familiar thing around. Time froze as Jake assessed the situation. In an instant, he understood. He was not merely an officer here to enforce the law, but a human being capable of kindness, a protector willing to shield the vulnerable. The moment called for compassion, not just authority. "Everyone step back," he said, his voice calm but firm, cutting through the chaos. The couple paused, glancing at him, their anger momentarily wrested from their grasp. With Rex standing sentinel at his side, Jake's presence commanded the room, shifting the tide from antagonism to tentative peace. He lowered his tone, addressing the parents directly. "I'm here to help, but you need to talk to me, not each other." Jake felt the weight of his role transform as he witnessed their uncertainty. He wasn't just standing as an officer of the law. He was a bridge ready to connect them to understanding. The couple's aggression simmered into silent exchanges, their eyes darting, reflecting the underlying pain and confusion. As Jake listened, he recognized the deep-seated fears that corrupted the foundation of their relationship. Layer by layer, he began to understand. Not just the argument, but the very human ache that lay beneath it. His heart ached for the child in the corner, who remained a ghost amidst the upheaval, unable to express his fears. Jake squared his shoulders, affirming his path. He had set out tonight to confront chaos and protect, but he was learning that sometimes being a protector meant facilitating healing over enforcement. Jake approached the child, kneeling to meet his gaze. "It's okay to feel scared. I'm here for you." He offered reassurance, realizing that building trust in this moment was as crucial as diffusing the parents' conflict. As the boy nodded slowly, opening up just a fraction, Jake felt a swell of hope. The realization that saving a family could mean directing anger into understanding and fear into connection. But the dialogue between the parents was fraught and complicated. As the atmosphere shifted, so too did Jake's role. He was evolving from a defender of the law into a mediator of emotions, navigating the delicate balance of authority and empathy. In the unfolding moments, Jake grappled with a deeper truth. The true power of his position lay not in the badge he wore, but in the impact he could have on lives unfurling around him. This realization struck like lightning, a revelation that would continue to shape his journey in ways he could not yet fathom. Just as he breathed with newfound purpose, a sharp, unforeseen crack pierced through the fragile calm, a sudden shout that echoed from his left. Someone had entered the scene. What he soon realized was that the worst was yet to come, as the shadows hinting at danger grew longer, and the true challenge began to unravel before him. There was no turning back now. The conflict was reaching a boiling point, an impending storm that would test every ounce of his evolving resolve. The interruption came swift and jarring, like a thunderclap that shattered the uneasy truce Jake had brokered. An unfamiliar voice echoed through the room, demanding attention, laced with the urgency of someone who had grown accustomed to asserting dominance. Jake spun toward the source, his instincts sharpening. There stood a man, tall and broad-shouldered, his arms crossed defiantly. The tension in the air thickened, and Jake felt a surge of protectiveness for the child, whose small frame seemed to shrink further into the corner. The newcomer's presence created a palpable shift, as if he had disrupted an equilibrium that had taken Jake considerable effort to create. "Well, what the hell are you doing here?" the man barked, his glare slicing through the room like a knife. The couple, who had just begun to lower their defenses, stiffened again. Jake took a measured step forward, every muscle in his body coiled with an instinctual need to shield the vulnerable. He kept his tone steady, though inside, uncertainty flickered. "I'm here to ensure everyone's safety," he replied, focusing on the eyes of the man before him. "We all need to talk this through." "That's not how things work," the man retorted, his voice booming. "Get out of my house. They've caused enough pain already." There was a flash of something more in his words, raw hurt, veiled by rage. Jake's thoughts raced. The stakes were raised dramatically. The dynamics could shift from a chance at reconciliation back to chaos in the blink of an eye. But he could not retreat. With Rex by his side, Jake was determined to navigate this minefield. "Listen," Jake began, his voice firm yet measured. "I understand that emotions are running high. But this is about the child. We need to protect him first." As he spoke, he could see the doubt creeping into the man's expression. Jake seized the opportunity, pressing gently. "If we can talk and find a way to manage this, to make sure he doesn't bear the brunt of it, would you be willing to try?" The man hesitated, weighing options that flickered across his expression. Behind him, the couple's faces mirrored a complex blend of hope and crisis. It was a delicate moment, one that could either plunge them back into discord or pave the way for understanding. Jake assessed every nuance, acutely aware of the magnitude of his words. Rex shifted at Jake's feet, a steady presence that seemed to resonate with his owner's resolve. It was as if the canine sensed the peril unfolding and reinforced Jake's silent pledge to protect. "Think about what your anger could do to him," Jake continued, glancing back at the child. "You know what it's like to care for someone so deeply. Don't let this conflict define who you are to him." The man's jaw clenched, and for a moment, vulnerability flickered across his eyes, unfiltered and raw. Behind the facade of anger, Jake detected a flicker of reluctance, a yearning for resolution that battled against the powerful need to defend his pride. Then, quietly, almost imperceptibly, the shoulders began to drop. Jake could feel it, a small but significant shift in the air. But before the moment could expand into healing, the tension spiraled once again as the mother broke into tears, the sound echoing in the room like a galvanizing force. "I'm terrified we're losing him too," she cried, and the raw emotion in her voice cut through the chaos like a blade. This was the turning point Jake had been waiting for, a trial of his resolve built on empathy. How could he facilitate a conversation that would tether together these fractured souls? He needed a plan, something that would steer this into a breakthrough instead of further division. "Let's take a breath," Jake said, his gaze sweeping the room. "I'm going to sit down with each of you. Can we talk as a family? I'm here to listen. I cannot fix this, but maybe we can start by understanding each other." The family's eyes narrowed in at him, mistrust still simmering. Jake's heart raced. If he could get them talking, the impact could ripple far beyond this moment. Yet there remained an unshakable presence of potential violence agitating beneath their surface. Suddenly, a voice in Jake's head screamed to prepare for the unexpected, a truth hidden just at the edge of his awareness. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down. It was no longer just about conflict resolution. It was a question of survival. The next words that sprang from his lips would not only direct the urgency in the room, but dictate the trajectory of their intertwined lives. "Your child deserves more than this," he declared, loud enough for the man to absorb, anchoring his focus back onto the vulnerable center of their storm. As silence enveloped them, Jake pondered the internal demons he faced. Could one moment change lives forever? Ultimately, it would come down to a decision, not just for this family, but for himself. The point of no return loomed ominously, testing the very fabric of his resolve. And somewhere within that silence, Jake felt the first stirrings of a new awareness, a sense that this encounter would be pivotal in redefining his purpose, not merely as an officer, but as a catalyst for change. Yet the shadows were still shifting, whispers of danger lingering in the background, unbeknownst to everyone in the room. As Kai, the child, gave a shivering nod, Jake's gut tightened with a premonition. What emerged from this tender moment might present a greater challenge than he could anticipate. As eyes locked on his with unspoken expectations, Jake steeled himself. The true confrontation was just beginning, and the impending storm lay in wait. The charged silence hung in the air, hanging like an unseen weight. Jake's heart raced, the tension palpable as he shifted his gaze between the man's hardened expression and the quivering form of the child. He was on the brink of something transformative, both for this family and for himself. It was time to dig deeper, to uncover what was truly driving this family's turmoil. "Start with me," Jake urged, finally directing his attention to the man. "Why are you so angry? What happened to make you feel this way?" He spoke softly, but with intention. It was a calculated move to pierce through the armor of hostility surrounding them. The man shifted, eyes narrowing in calculation, wrestling against vulnerability. "You think you know pain. You don't understand what we've been through." His voice wavered and faltered slightly at the end, revealing cracks in his facade. Jake took a steadying breath, intensifying his focus. He sensed that if he could harness the rage, redirect it toward a constructive conversation, they might just emerge with a semblance of reconciliation. "Help me understand. I'm here because I care for Kai. All I want is for him to feel safe." At the mention of the child's name, a flicker of recognition coursed through the man's eyes. For a fleeting moment, Jake glimpsed the man's fierce love for his son overshadowed by anger. There was more to this confrontation than simple parental strife. "I did what I thought was best. I was protecting him from—" The man trailed off, the frustration boiling over, seemingly lost in thoughts only he could understand. "You've been protecting him from what?" Jake urged, pressing for clarity but with a gentleness that invited connection rather than conflict. In that moment, it struck Jake that here lay the heart of the family's turmoil. The man's elusive anger was rooted in fear. Fear of inadequacy, fear of failure as a father, fears that clawed and tore at his insides. "From you," the man finally spat, his hands clenching tighter into fists. "From judgment, and from the hurt they've caused us." Jake noticed the mother, who had been silently grieving, now shifting in her seat as realization dawned on her. "You think we wanted this? You think we chose to hurt you?" she implored, glancing around at their twisted reality. "We were lost too, just as scared." The rawness of her words ignited a flicker of something new in the room, an ember of shared pain both Jake and the family could rally around. It was this shared struggle that bore the potential for growth and healing. "Then let's talk about it," Jake pressed, wrapping the dialogue in a collective narrative that might create unity instead of division. "What if we explore these feelings together? You're all suffering, but battling each other will cost you everything." He felt the walls begin to crack slightly under the weight of the truth, and his intuition told him that now was the moment to heighten his approach. The family needed an anchor to draw upon. "Maybe I can share something too," he offered, letting a glimpse of vulnerability surface from within his professional armor. "I've been through my struggles. I know what it means to feel lost and to fight for someone you love fiercely." A silence settled once again, but this one was different. It was laced with curiosity instead of animosity. The man studied Jake, his defenses lowering, while the mother wiped a tear, her expression softening, as empathy interwoven with desperation began to pour forth. Jake noticed Kai watching them, hungrily seeking a semblance of resolution. In that vulnerable gaze, he felt a spark igniting his own purpose, a shift in his professional trajectory that wasn't merely about law enforcement. He could become a mediator equipped to navigate the emotional challenges that families faced. With determination, Jake implored, "If we can look at these feelings deeply, perhaps it could change everything. Your family, your roles as parents, your love for Kai. The path forward can be filled with hope if we let empathy guide us." There was a flicker once more in the man's eyes, and Jake felt a surge of hope transform into urgency. He had laid the groundwork for change. Would they choose to step onto this path together, or would they retreat back into bitterness and fear? As the moment elongated, tension grew palpable once more, not from animosity, but anticipation. Jake sensed that fate rested in his hands, a decision awaited that would alter everything. In that instant, the weight of possibility settled in. A conviction began to stir within Jake. He realized he was not merely a facilitator, he was a driver of this family's destiny. But just as he prepared to steer the conversation towards resolute action, a creak echoed through the increasingly charged atmosphere. The door at the back of the room had been left ajar, and Jake turned to see a shadow lurking just outside, a figure watching with keen interest whose presence could potentially derail their entire breakthrough. Who was this newcomer, and what dangers did they bring into this fragile moment of connection? Jake could feel the undercurrents shift once more as the path to resolution became overshadowed by the threat of external forces beyond their control. The shadow lingered, poised with an unsettling stillness, almost as if it were drawing energy from the tension in the room. Jake's heart pounded louder than before. He had just cracked the fragile shell of anger and despair enveloping the family, and now this unknown figure threatened to rip it all apart. Yet rather than surrender to panic, Jake felt a surge of clarity. It was time for confrontation, not just with the newcomer, but also with the very fears that both the family and he himself had been avoiding. "Who's there?" Jake's voice cut through the silence, firm yet cautious. The family's gaze shifted towards the door, characterized by a mix of curiosity and apprehension. He sensed the shift in energy. The family was at a tipping point, and their responses could either spark movement toward healing or regress them into chaos. Slowly, the figure stepped into the room, revealing a teenage boy with disheveled hair and eyes that flickered with apprehension and defiance. "I'm just checking on things." His voice trembled slightly, exposing the cracks in his nonchalant facade. Jake could see the boy's tension mirrored the family's, a common thread binding them all in their shared struggle. "Checking on what? What do you know about what's happening here?" Jake pressed gently but assertively, focusing not just on the boy but also the family. The man's fist tightened again, instinctually ready to protect, while the mother's gaze softened as she leaned in. Jake struck a balance, recognizing that if this boy held pieces to their struggle, this could be the breakthrough they needed. I just wanted to see if you were okay." The boy's voice finally cracked, vulnerability stripping him of the bravado he had tried to maintain. His gaze darted between the parents, specifically landing on Kai, who looked bewildered but intrigued. "Why are you really here?" Jake asked, redirecting the question, sensing the gravity of the boy's presence. If fear had brought them all here, perhaps he could turn that fear into a catalyst for growth. The boy hesitated, wrestling with words that seemed to momentarily elude him. "I heard the shouting. I know you're trying to help them. But things can't change." The weight of his admission settled heavily in the room, laying bare the despair that clung to the air. It was an honest reflection of the helplessness that had gripped the family, yet Jake sensed within that heaviness the potential for transformation. His role was now not only to guide this family, but also to empower the boy to see beyond his current reality. "Who says things can't change?" Jake challenged, his tone firm yet inviting. "You know the pain in this room. Your recognition of it means you understand that this family's struggle is part of a much larger narrative. What if we rewrote that narrative together?" As Jake spoke, he noticed the boy's posture shift. His defiance was beginning to crack. He turned slightly, as if considering a new perspective, opening the door to self-discovery through empathy. And there it was, the moment Jake had been waiting for, a mutual confrontation rooted in understanding rather than judgment. "Jake," the father breathed, his voice laden with confusion yet tinged with hope. "How do we start? We've been lost so long I don't even know where to begin." Jake's heart raced, not from fear but from adrenaline surging in response to the unfolding possibilities. "We start by acknowledging the hurt, by choosing to share rather than conceal the pain. Each of us here holds stories and experiences that matter, not just as individuals but as a community in the making." The boy blinked slowly, absorbing Jake's words. He shifted awkwardly, casting a glance at Kai, who now seemed more open, the innocence of a child reaching out for connection. As each family member absorbed Jake's approach, he felt the unseen walls that had kept them apart beginning to crumble. Could the boy, now an integral part of this complex emotional tapestry, help bridge the gaps between their struggles? In that moment, Jake could see glimmers of hope illuminating the darkness surrounding them. It filled him with an invigorating sense of purpose, as he realized each shared story could serve as a stepping stone toward healing, a beacon guiding them to shore. But as the family began to breathe more easily, the door creaked again. A sudden chill swept through the room as Jake exchanged glances with the newcomer's face. Could this unwelcome presence indeed undermine their collective resolve? As uncertainty loomed, the echo of palpable tension returned, reminding Jake that the path to transformation was fraught with intermittent danger. With his mind racing, Jake steeled himself for the inevitable clash. What awaited on the other side of that door could shift everything they had worked toward. Would this newcomer reignite fears within the family, or could they confront the past together? In that moment, Jake realized he would need to exploit every ounce of courage he had to protect the fragile connections forged in their darkest hour. The door swung open slowly, revealing a tall figure, darkened by the shadows from the room behind him. A weighty silence fell again, more suffocating than before. Jake's instincts surged as he faced another unknown. This time, uncertainty seeped into his resolve. The moment demanded action, and he felt the eyes of the family on him, their reliance blending with desperation. "Who are you?" Jake addressed the newcomer, his confidence straining under the pressing doubts that raced through his mind. The seriousness in his tone was unmistakable, infused with a protective energy that reverberated through the room. The father instinctively shifted closer to his family, every muscle in his body tightening as he braced for whatever confrontation was about to unfold. "I'm just here to pick up my brother," the figure replied, voice detached yet vibrating with an underlying anger that hung heavily around them. He pointed directly at the teenage boy, mirroring some unspoken tension. "He shouldn't be with you." Jake's heart sank. The boy had claimed a vulnerability that had almost rewritten his part in the family's story. But how was this young man meant to navigate such an acute clash of interests and emotions? This wasn't just about the boy. It was about realigning the family's fragmented bond. The potential of transformation lay in understanding the importance of his situation. "Why would you think he's not safe here?" Jake pressed, keeping his tone measured. He needed to redirect the tension away from animosity and toward curiosity. His instinct to dig deeper, to understand, was amplifying his awareness of the situation. The boy's eyes darted nervously to the floor, clearly burdened by shame and fear. "He doesn't understand. He thinks just because I've had it rough, I can't be trusted," he murmured, a hint of sorrow rising in his voice. Jake recognized the dimensions of that pain. This was more than mere confrontation. It was an opportunity to navigate the intricacies of personal trauma and the judgments that accompanied it. If he could address the inner lives of both the boy and the older sibling, perhaps they could pave a path that would not only heal, but also fortify their relationship. "I see both of you. The past affects us differently," Jake said gently, turning his gaze towards the newcomer. "Maybe it's time we talk honestly about who we are, and not just what we've been through." The father, still tightly wound, interjected. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" His voice reflected fear. The weight of years filled with distrust echoed in his response. "What if he's not ready to talk? We've kept these emotions buried for too long." Jake caught the quiver of hesitation that lay beneath the father's protective instincts, recognizing the struggle to expose vulnerabilities for fear of further pain. "Understandable," Jake nodded. "But it's about moving beyond the walls we've built around ourselves and choosing to engage, however intimidating that choice may be." The boy shifted from foot to foot, his defiance still fighting for air, yet a flicker of hope ignited in his gaze. Slowly, the looming darkness tied to his brother's presence began unraveling as openness hovered uncertainly in the air. If Jake could help them realize the strength and vulnerability, perhaps they could finally face the demons that had held them captive for so long. As Jake's words lingered, he could see the gears turning within the family, their rigid postures softening as he tailored his approach to suit each person's emotional landscape. It was a fragile beginning, still teetering on the brink of chaos, but Jake felt something shift, an undercurrent of potential flooding the room. But then, with a sudden terrifying burst, the older boy pushed past Jake, anger taking the helm. "No one understands," he shouted, his voice reverberating with raw emotion. The dynamic shattered as he confronted not just Jake, but the emotional weight of the entire situation. In that critical moment, Jake's resolve steadied within the storm of uncertainty. Could he withstand this uprising? The alarming rift that threatened to fracture the foundations he'd just begun to forge? The stakes escalated, the air thick with urgency, as Jake prepared for the fight ahead, not just for the family, but for the very heart of change that he fought zealously to establish. As tension crackled like electricity, Jake found himself questioning how far each of them was truly willing to delve. The moment hung, delicate yet volatile, like a tightrope stretched over an abyss. What awaited could alter their existences forever. Would they lean into their fears and at last confront the darkness they had each been harboring? Jake sensed that the answers remained tantalizingly close, and the time had finally come to embrace them. The air pulsed with an intensity that felt almost palpable as Jake braced himself against the onslaught of emotions swirling around him. The older brother's outburst echoed, reverberating deep within the room, battering against the fragility of the moment they were trying to construct. The tension crackled, eliciting a sense of urgency that ignited Jake's determination. "Understand you? You're the one who doesn't get it," the older boy yelled, frustration spilling over. Jake inhaled deeply, recognizing how precious this moment was, but also how precarious. He was at a crossroads, not just for himself, but for a family poised on the brink of reconciliation, or disaster. His focus shifted, honing in on the younger brother whose eyes mirrored the storm. Jake stepped towards him, trying to anchor the conversation. "I see pain in both of you. You've suffered," he acknowledged. "But working through it won't happen if we can't communicate." The boy clenched his fists, grappling with his own turmoil. "Easy for you to say. You don't know what we've been through." His voice trembled, a blend of anger and vulnerability. Jake's heart ached for them. He had navigated his own labyrinth of trauma, and he knew that healing often lived on the untraveled paths of honesty. Yet he wrestled with the reality that the stakes were sky high, and the pain lurking behind their defenses could easily replicate chaos. "You're right, I don't," he conceded. "But I want to understand." That's the first step. The family's eyes pierced him, suspicion layered with uncertainty, but he still saw a flicker of something beneath their guarded exteriors. A spark of hope, perhaps. It was a catalyst in the making. He needed to leverage that. "Let's turn the spotlight away from judgment and think about what you both want," he urged, his voice steady. "Your relationship is more important than your past. Protecting it doesn't require you to hide. It requires you to open up. What do you hope for moving forward?" The older sibling fumed, his frustration palpable as he struggled with Jake's proposition. "What do you suggest? I just let my brother trust the people who've broken him?" The challenge was unmistakable. It warranted a response not born of rhetoric but lived experience. Jake stepped closer, his expression earnest. "Trust isn't blind. It's built brick by brick. You both need to lay your bricks together starting now. You owe it to each other." The father remained silent, his shoulders tight, bound in uncertainty. His protective instincts pulsed through the air, but Jake suspected he was teetering on the edge of connection and fear. The desire to shield his family battled against the realization that real safety lay in understanding, a delicate balance. "Which would hurt more?" Jake asked, voicing a question that lingered like an unspoken truth. To keep holding on to hurt, or to risk the vulnerability that comes with healing? There was a shift, a palpable moment of stillness as his words landed, sowing seeds of contemplation. The older brother's eyes flared momentarily with defiance, yet Jake detected the faintest tremor of questioning beneath. I think I'm tired," the older boy finally whispered, the facade cracking under the weight of realization. It was a moment of vulnerability, as if he'd begun to lay down his defenses. Jake seized this opportunity. "Tired enough to transform, even when it feels steep? It starts by leaning into that tiredness, together." A fragile silence enveloped them, the intensity morphing into a breath of possibility. Jake's heart raced. He had sparked a conversation that could change the very trajectory of their lives, but he knew they weren't out of the woods yet. The younger boy stared at his brother, uncertainty reflected in his eyes. "Will you really listen?" Jake sensed a collective intake of breath, the future of the family teetering on the edge of that question. In this fragile space, Jake realized he needed to remain vigilant. The conversation had unfolded a gateway, yet the potential for collapse hovered above it. Each family member faced layers of unprocessed emotions, and a shared history that threatened to overwhelm them. The battle for trust and healing had only just begun, and the realization set in. He needed a game plan, a way to guide them through the minefields. As he took a tentative step forward, a new fear coiled within him. Had he ignited something that could catch fire, or had he simply thrown gasoline on a blazing inferno? The immensity of their journey loomed, and Jake was acutely aware that a single misstep could revert them back to the cold shadows of doubt and despair. Would his words foster connection, or would they light the path to greater chaos? Jake's resolve solidified as he faced the unknown. There was no turning back now. He would have to confront the next wave of their challenge head-on. The family needed to find their voice before the darkness consumed them again, and time was a luxury they could not afford. The moment arrived, heavy with potential. But as Jake took a breath, preparing for the next critical step in their conversation, an unexpected voice cut through. The father, finally breaking his silence. "I want to know if this is really worth the risk." The question rippled through the air, uncertain but demanding clarity, forcing Jake to confront what lay ahead. Jake felt the weight of the father's question settle heavily on his shoulders. It was a stark reminder of the gravity of the moments they were entering. This wasn't just about healing wounds. It was a defining juncture that could either bring the family together or deepen the divisions that had long plagued them. Jake paused, allowing silence to linger for a beat longer than comfort expected. "The risk is where growth begins," Jake replied, his voice steadying himself as he spoke. "Nothing worth having comes without a bit of vulnerability. However, your willingness to take this step as a family, that's what will determine if this effort pays off or not." He locked eyes with the father, the intensity giving way to a muted understanding. Jake recognized the struggle reflected in the older man's gaze, an internal battle waged between fear of further harm and the yearning for healing. "Can you afford to be just as afraid of doing nothing?" Jake pressed gently, sensing that this question might resonate. The father's jaw tightened, as if wrestling with a reckoning. In contrast, the older brother shifted from defensive to contemplative, while the younger boy's eyes lit with a tentative hope. Maybe they were beginning to absorb their own shared history, rather than endure a solitary suffering. "Let's frame this differently," Jake proposed, his mind racing to devise a path forward. "What if we commit to offering each other 10 minutes, just 10 minutes, of pure honesty without interruptions or reactions? It could break down the walls just enough to allow space for trust to breathe." The older brother scoffed lightly, but Jake caught the spark of curiosity. "What's the worst that could happen?" Jake added. "If nothing else, it'll give you a clearer understanding of where you're both really standing." Silence reigned again as the room absorbed his challenge. The father's brow furrowed, reluctant to plunge into vulnerable waters. But Jake remained resolute, his own experiences bubbling up in support of the moment. He knew firsthand that succumbing to silence often bred resentment. The truth offered the sole route to authenticity. The younger brother, with a tentative voice, seemed inclined to take the leap. "I'll try," he said, his eyes darting between his father and brother, a glimmer of resolve shining through. "Try is the first step," Jake affirmed, offering an encouraging nod. He sensed momentum building, an undercurrent of possibility, a break in the storm. He continued, "Older brother, why not share what scares you about trusting? And younger brother, mention what you're afraid might happen if that trust is broken." At this, the older boy's face hardened, cheeks flushing as he wrestled with emotions, yet he remained silent. This moment was critical. It would test both Jake's influence and the family's willingness to engage. "Your fears are valid, and so are your aspirations," Jake reflected. "Finding that balance, we need to confront it. Whatever you share, the other must listen without a response. Understand first, and then express. It's a chance to start anew." As Jake looked around the room, he felt a tentative shift in the atmosphere. The father sighed deeply, as if the weight of past burdens was beginning to relent, and the older brother's defiance flickered. Just as he felt a flicker of optimism, the older sibling finally took a step forward, fists unclenching slightly, revealing vulnerability. "Fine, I'm scared. Scared our family will never be whole again. That if I let him trust again, the hurt will come back." Jake's heartbeat quickened, sensing that his opportunity to make a genuine impact was manifesting before him. "Perfect," Jake encouraged, the words surfacing so naturally. "And younger brother, what about your fear? Share it. It's time." As the younger sibling began to open up, heart on his sleeve, the atmosphere shifted profoundly. Jake held his breath, bracing for what would unfurl from this moment of truth. Yet, as the words tumbled forth, another voice interrupted, a shadow from the past looming larger than ever. The mother appeared at the doorway, her expression unreadable, and in that instant, Jake felt a wave of disquiet wash over him. Would her return build bridges or shatter the fragile progress they had just made? The mother stepped into the room, her presence an unmistakable force that disrupted the delicate atmosphere Jake had cultivated. Silence fell heavily, everyone turned towards her, caught in the crossfire of emotions bristling around them. Jake caught her gaze, scanning for the remnants of the love that had brought this family together in the first place. "Where have you been?" the older brother shot at her, venom rising in his words. "You left us hanging while everything fell apart." "Stop," the mother replied, her voice a mix of weary strength and vulnerability. "This isn't about my absence. It's about you all moving forward." But the hurt hung in the air, thick and unresolved, reverberating around the room. Jake felt tension surge as the stakes rose. Was this the point of fracture he had feared? Yet beneath that layer of hostility, he sensed an undeniable urge to reconcile, to heal. A shared yearning among them. It was time, he realized, to pivot back to the purpose of their gathering. "Wait a moment," Jake broke in, stepping closer to the mother. "You're here now. This is your moment just as much as it is theirs." He turned to the boys, inviting their attention. "Let's get it all out in the open. Truth and honesty, both the painful and the hopeful, are vital to this family. This is the opportunity for each of you to reclaim your voice." The room held its breath as he continued. "Mom, what do you have to say? Where does this leave you?" With visible effort, the mother lifted her chin, collecting her thoughts. "I chose to step away because I thought it would keep you safe, protect our family from further damage," she began, her tone faltering slightly. "But in reality, it only drove us further apart. I never wanted to be the parent who lost touch. I was scared, and I wish I had been stronger. I should have fought harder for us." The emotional gravity swung toward her, wrapping around the room like a warm embrace. Each family member absorbed her words, a reflective silence laying a foundation for the possibility of unity once again. Jake could see the cracks forming in the barriers they had built around themselves. The tears they had concealed might finally flow forth, washing away the accumulated hurt. "I feel guilty too," said the younger brother softly, his voice trembling. "Guilty for wanting you all back, but afraid of getting hurt again." The older brother shifted uncomfortably, gaze dropping to the floor, shame creeping into his features. "I'm afraid we'll never be whole again. It feels too broken." Jake took a step closer to the family. "Let's talk about what being whole would look like. It's okay to express fears, but it's also time to express hope." "Hope?" the older brother scoffed initially, but the hint of intrigue pushed the skepticism back. "Yes, hope," Jake affirmed, sensing the tide turning. "Why not envision what you wish for as a family? If you could press restart, how would that look?" The mother caught on, her eyes brightening. "Maybe it starts with us being more honest with one another, establishing trust without judgment." "Exactly," Jake encouraged, allowing their collective will to reshape the narrative. It could be about showing vulnerability, making allowances for mistakes with love, and working together. The conversation sparked anew, the fears slowly being twisted into aspirations. The older brother's rigid posture relaxed slightly as he murmured, "I want things to be different. I want us to try." Suddenly Jake felt an exhilaration wash over him, a blend of relief and burgeoning hope. In guiding this family through their darkest moment, he discovered a renewed clarity within himself. He was no longer climbing the ladder of expectation. He was carving his own path, embodying the family man his father had admired, someone who connected through compassion rather than command. With every exchange of vulnerability, Their voices grew stronger, more aligned. As they unveiled their shared truths, the fear lurking in their hearts took a back seat. They had begun the journey of transformation, not merely as an officer serving a community, but as an agent of healing woven into the fabric of human connection. "And what about you?" The mother turned to Jake, her eyes filled with genuine curiosity. "What's driven you to be here? Why this space?" Jake paused, feeling the weight of their gaze upon him. His voice held a newfound firmness, a rich resonance of personal clarity. "Because I've learned that being a protector extends beyond the badge. It's about redefining boundaries, embracing empathy, and understanding that our fights, internal or external, are best tackled together." As they nodded, the unease began dissipating. The warmth enveloped them, a feeling of hope prevailing over hardship. They realized the journey wasn't simply about confronting their own shadows, but rather folding each other into that narrative of healing. With renewed conviction, they committed to meeting often, to share openly, to embrace discomfort, to celebrate the victories, no matter how small. Each memorials attached to their own imagined futures. Together, they would build new legacies. As Jake stepped back, he felt unburdened. A collective resolve ignited within them, and he recognized the significance of what they had achieved. That in navigating the dark waters of confrontation, their vulnerabilities had transformed into an indomitable bond. In those fragile moments, Jake stood not just as the officer of the law, but as proof of the transformative power of human connection. He walked away content, not because the journey was finished, but because they had turned the corner toward a collective transformation and endless possibilities. As he drove home that night, Rex sat proudly beside him, the quiet companionship affirming the deep sense of fulfillment surging within Jake. He had embraced his own father's legacy, crystallizing it into a living embodiment of compassion and integrity. Having chosen humanity over rigidity, Jake had conquered a part of himself he feared he might never grasp. Here was his triumph. He had achieved the clarity, the purpose, and above all the connection he had sought all along, the call to support those in need while remaining true to himself. So as lights faded in Miller's Grove that night, Jake Thompson, an officer and a man, drove forward into the next chapter of his life, emboldened by the understanding that true protection often requires vulnerability, a lesson he was eager to carry into every new experience ahead. This is the moment to show your support. Subscribe immediately to the channel so you don't miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and keep this powerful content reaching others. Comment your reactions and theories about this ending. We want to hear your thoughts. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. Don't wait even one more second to share. Only true fans of personal overcoming stories understand the importance of supporting the channel through these actions.